The fastest way to learn who truly sees you is to lose everything that usually makes people look your way. At 11:47 on a wet Thursday night in Manhattan, Ethan Cole stood under the dead glow of a flickering bus stop sign, with rain dripping off the shoulders of a coat that cost more than most people's monthly rent. And for the first time in 15 years, none of it meant a thing. His wallet was gone. His phone was gone. His driver had no idea where he was. The black car that had dropped him at the corner was long out of sight, and the city that used to open doors for him now passed him like he was part of the sidewalk. 30 minutes earlier, he had been in a glass tower overlooking Park Avenue, signing off on numbers so large they barely felt real anymore. Now he had exactly 73 cents in his front pocket, cold hands, soaked loafers, and the sinking realization that without a name, a card, or a title, a millionaire could become nobody in less than an hour. Across the street, a narrow diner glowed like a lighthouse between a laundromat and a closed-up pharmacy, its neon sign buzzing against the rain. He hesitated before pushing the door open, and the warmth that hit him smelled like coffee, grilled onions, and old vinyl booths polished by years of elbows and late-night confessions. A couple at the counter glanced over and looked away. The man behind the register looked at Ethan's damp coat, then at his empty hands, and his expression hardened in an instant. Ethan knew that look. It was the kind that measured worth before words. He almost turned around. Then he heard a voice, soft but steady, somewhere near the pie case. "Give him a minute, Ray." He looked up and saw her. She wore a faded blue apron, white sneakers that had seen better days, and a name tag that read Chloe in block letters that were starting to peel. A loose strand of blonde hair had escaped her ponytail, and there was something quiet in her face that didn't ask questions before offering kindness. She crossed the room with a pot of coffee in one hand and a tired grace that made the whole diner seem less harsh. "You can sit there," she said, nodding toward the last booth. By the window, Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. He wasn't used to not knowing what to say. "I don't have my wallet," he admitted. Chloe glanced once at the rain outside, then back at him, as if she were weighing something bigger than the price of a meal. "That's okay," she said. "Tonight doesn't look like it's been easy on anybody." And with that, she set down a hot mug in front of a man the whole city had already decided was worth nothing. Steam curled from the coffee and fogged the window beside Ethan's booth, blurring the red taillights outside into soft streaks of color, and for a moment he just stared at the mug as if warmth itself had become unfamiliar. Chloe moved through the diner with the fast, practiced rhythm of someone who had done too much for too little for far too long. She topped off a truck driver's cup, rang up a slice of apple pie, wiped down a counter already cleaned, and smiled the kind of smile people in service jobs learn to wear even when life has not given them a single reason to. But Ethan noticed the details most people missed. The sole of her right sneaker was starting to separate near the toe. Her left sleeve had been stitched by hand with thread that did not quite match. When she reached into her apron for a pen, a folded past-due bill slipped halfway out before she quickly tucked it back in. It was not hard to read the strain in someone who had no room left to hide it. Ray muttered something from behind the register, low enough that it was meant to stay private, but the diner was small, and the words carried anyway. "You keep feeding people for free. You are going to be the one who cannot make rent." Chloe did not even turn around. "It is 1 cup of coffee, Ray. And that pie you are eyeing is not free either." She exhaled through her nose, not angry, just tired in a way that sounded older than she was. "I know." Ethan looked down at the menu, though he had no intention of pretending anymore. "I can leave," he said quietly when she returned to his table. "I do not want to cost you your job." Chloe gave a small shrug, then slid into the seat across from him for half a second, just long enough to speak honestly before another order pulled her away. "My job has been hanging by a thread for months. That is not your fault." There was no self-pity in her voice, only fact. "My mom has been sick since January. I pick up every night shift I can get. Day shifts go to people who have been here longer, and tips after midnight are mostly coffee refills and apologies." She stood again before the words could become too personal and set a plate in front of him anyway, a thick slice of chicken pot pie with the crust still golden from the oven. Ethan looked up. "Chloe, I said I cannot pay for this." "Then pay it forward someday," she said. It should have sounded simple, almost casual, but the line landed somewhere deeper than she could have known. She reached for the guest check pad, tore off the top slip, and wrote something on the back in neat, careful print before placing it beside his plate. Everybody is somebody to someone. Ethan read the sentence twice. In boardrooms, people spoke to him because they wanted access. At galas, they laughed before he finished his jokes. But here, in a narrow diner on a rainy Manhattan night, a waitress with worn-out shoes and overdue bills had just offered him the one thing money had never been able to buy on demand: dignity. For the next 20 minutes, Ethan ate in silence, not because he had nothing to say, but because something about the smallness of the moment demanded honesty from him. The crust of the pot pie shattered under his fork, warm and buttery, the kind of comfort food no private chef had served him in years because private chefs tended to chase elegance, not memory. It tasted like the kind of dinner people ate when they came home tired and still believed home could fix something. Chloe kept moving, taking orders, carrying plates, refilling coffee, and every now and then Ethan caught her pressing 2 fingers to her temple like she was trying to push away a headache before it had the chance to settle in for the night. At 12:18, the diner finally quieted. The truck driver left 2 singles under his cup. The couple by the counter paid and hurried back into the ring. Ray killed 1 bank of lights and began stacking stools at the far end. Chloe came over with the check she knew he could not pay and turned it face down so Ray would not say another word. "There is a phone by the register if you need to call someone," she said. Ethan looked at her for a second, then nodded. "Thank you." He rose from the booth, carrying the little paper slip with her message on it like it was worth more than the 100 contracts he had signed that month. His assistant, Daniel Mercer, answered on the second ring from the diner phone, already sounding panicked. "Mr. Cole, where are you?" Ethan glanced toward the window, where Chloe was wiping rain from the glass with a towel that had long since stopped helping. "Midtown. On Lexington." "I am fine." Daniel exhaled so sharply it nearly crackled through the line. "Security has been looking everywhere. Your board meeting was delayed. Your sister called twice. I am sending a car now." Ethan should have felt relief. Instead, all he felt was the strange weight of returning to a life that suddenly looked very polished and very hollow from where he stood. 10 minutes later, a black sedan pulled up outside, too sleek for the block, too obvious for the hour. Ray noticed first. His posture changed immediately. Chloe did not move until Ethan set the empty mug on the counter and slid the sugar jar back into place like he did not want to leave even one thing messy behind him. "Looks like your ride found you," she said, trying to smile. He wanted to explain, wanted to tell her that he was not what he seemed, but the truth felt too large and too late for a room this small. So he reached into his coat, found the only money still there, 3 quarters and a penny, and placed it beside the register with quiet embarrassment. Chloe looked at the coins, then back at him, and her eyes softened in a way that nearly undid him. "Keep it," she said. "You might need it more than I do tonight." An hour later, back in a suite on the Upper East Side, wrapped in dry clothes and surrounded by polished wood, marble counters, and every comfort money could buy, Ethan sat on the edge of a king-sized bed and stared at the diner receipt in his hand. "Everybody is somebody to someone." He read it again, then turned it over and saw a faint grease mark in the corner from the pie she had served him. For reasons he could not fully explain, that tiny smudge hit him harder than the missing wallet, the delayed meeting, or the dozen voicemails waiting on Daniel's phone. It was proof that for one rainy night in Manhattan, when his title had vanished and his name meant nothing, one exhausted waitress with worn-out shoes had still chosen to treat him like he mattered. By 7:30 the next morning, Manhattan had already put on its polished face again, all sharp suits, rushing footsteps, and polished windows catching the pale spring sun. But Ethan Cole sat in the back of his town car with the diner receipt folded inside his wallet like it belonged there more than any black card ever had. Daniel Mercer sat across from him with a tablet full of delayed meetings, revised schedules, and the kind of urgent updates that usually ruled Ethan's mornings. "The board wants you in the office by 9, Daniel said. "You missed 3 investor calls, and your sister is still upset that security lost track of you." Ethan kept his eyes on the passing storefronts. "What is the name of the diner on Lexington between 42nd and 43rd? Daniel blinked. "Excuse me." "The diner," Ethan repeated. "Find out who owns it, how long it has been there, and whether it is connected to any chain." Daniel frowned, confused but obedient, and tapped quickly across the screen. "Midtown Table Grill. Small operation. Family owned on paper, but managed by a holding company that oversees several late-night properties. Ethan held out his hand. "Give me the tablet." He scanned the report in silence. Staff turnover was high. Complaints were frequent. Wages sat at the legal minimum. Profit margins were strong. It was the kind of business summary he had approved 1,000 times without seeing the human cost hiding under clean numbers. He handed the tablet back and made a decision so quickly it startled even him. "Cancel the board until 10:30. "For what reason?" Daniel asked. Ethan reached for the navy wool coat waiting beside him, then paused and pushed it away. "Because I am going back." Daniel stared. "Back where?" Ethan looked out at the city, then down. At Chloe's neat handwriting one more time. "To the one place in this city where nobody knew who I was, and someone still chose to care." He did not return in a tailored coat or polished dress shoes. He changed into dark jeans, a charcoal sweater, and an old brown jacket from the back of his closet that made him look more like a professor on a bad morning than the founder of a hospitality empire. When he stepped into Midtown Table Grill at 8:15, the breakfast rush had just begun. Bacon hissed on the griddle. A radio near the kitchen played low country music beneath the clatter of plates. Chloe was there, moving faster than the clock seemed fair to ask of anyone. Her blonde hair was pinned up tighter today, but the fatigue in her eyes had not changed. Neither had the warmth. She noticed him almost instantly, and surprise crossed her face before she softened into a small smile. "You made it through the night," she said as she walked over with a coffee pot in hand. "Barely," Ethan answered, taking the booth by the window again. "I figured I still owed this place a proper thank you." Chloe poured coffee into a chipped white mug. "You do not owe me anything." "Maybe not," he said, looking up at her. "But I wanted to see you when the city was being honest." She laughed at that, a quick, quiet sound that vanished almost as soon as it arrived. "The city is never honest before noon." Before Ethan could answer, a sharp male voice cut across the room from behind the register. Ray was back, more irritated than tired this time, his tie crooked and his patience thinner than yesterday. "Martha, table 6 has been waiting 5 minutes, he snapped toward the kitchen pass. A silver-haired woman carrying 2 plates murmured an apology and hurried forward, but one plate tipped slightly in her shaking hand. Ray rolled his eyes. "If you cannot handle a breakfast rush, I can find someone who can." Chloe moved before Ethan even had time to process it. She took the plate from Martha's hand, set it safely on the counter, and faced Ray with a steadiness that made the entire diner seem to pause. "She can handle it," Chloe said. "She has handled it for 15 years. The printer jammed, the toast station backed up, and she is covering for Nate because he called in sick. So maybe the problem is not Martha." Ray's jaw tightened. A few customers looked down at their menus, pretending not to hear, but Ethan heard every word. More important, he saw the look on Martha's face, the kind that appears when someone is not just helped, but defended. Ray muttered something under his breath and turned away. Chloe picked up the plates again like nothing had happened and carried them to table 6 with the same calm dignity she had shown Ethan the night before. Watching her, Ethan felt a shift inside himself that had nothing to do with gratitude anymore. One act of kindness could be dismissed as impulse. 2 could be luck. But this was character, and character was rare. When Chloe returned, Ethan looked at her a little differently than he had just 12 hours earlier. Not as the waitress who had rescued a bad night, but as a woman whose heart stayed generous even when life gave her every excuse not to be. The breakfast rush did not slow so much as fray at the edges, thinning from a storm into a steady grind of coffee refills, syrup bottles, and the low hum of people trying to make peace with a weekday morning. And Ethan stayed longer than he had planned, ordering toast he barely touched just to keep a reason to remain in that booth by the window. From there, he watched Chloe move through the diner like someone holding together more than trays and tickets. She checked on Martha without making it obvious. She slipped an extra banana into a takeout bag for a cab driver who looked half asleep. She smiled at a young mother counting dollar bills before paying the check and quietly removed the charge for orange juice before the woman noticed. It was not performance. It was instinct. And that, Ethan was beginning to realize, was exactly what made it powerful. Around 9:15, the front door opened and a cold gust followed in with an older man wearing a rain-spotted jacket and work boots lined with salt from old winter storms. He hesitated just inside the entrance, eyes scanning the room the way hungry people do when they are trying not to look hungry. Ray saw him and stiffened immediately. "Restroom is for customers only," he called. Out before the man had even spoken. The man nodded once, embarrassed, and started to back toward the door. Chloe reached the counter before he made it 2 steps. "Sir," she said gently, "you can sit down if you want." Ray shot her a warning look. "Chloe." She ignored it. "Booth 3 is clean." The man lowered himself into the seat like he was trying not to take up too much space. Ethan felt the air in the diner change. Some customers looked away. Others watched the way people watch a problem they are grateful belongs to someone else. Chloe poured coffee, set down a plate of scrambled eggs and toast, and did it all with the same unforced kindness she had shown Ethan the night before. Ray came around the counter so fast his shoes squeaked against the tile. "Are you out of your mind?" he hissed, keeping his voice low enough for the room, but not for dignity. "You do not give away food every time someone wanders in off the street." Chloe stood her ground. "He is hungry, and you are not paid to decide what gets comped." She folded her arms, tired but steady. "Then take it out of my tips." Ray laughed without humor. "Your tips barely cover your bus fare." That landed harder than he intended. Ethan saw it in the quick flicker behind Chloe's eyes, the brief sting of truth spoken cruelly. But even then, she did not retreat. "People are not disposable because they are broke," she said. Ray glanced toward Ethan, toward Martha, toward the customers pretending not to listen, and perhaps that was what pushed his pride past reason. "You know what?" he snapped. "If you care so much, you can take your apron and go care somewhere else. Turn it in. You are done here." For 1 suspended second, the entire diner went silent except for the hiss from the griddle. Martha looked stricken. The older man at booth 3 lowered his gaze to the untouched eggs like shame had followed him to the table. Ethan started to rise, every instinct in him rejecting what he was hearing, but Chloe beat him to motion. Slowly, with hands that only trembled once, she untied her faded blue apron and laid it on the counter. Her name tag made a small plastic click against the laminate when she set it down. Then she lifted her chin and looked Ray straight in the eye. "I was caring here," she said softly. "That was never the problem." She turned, collected her coat from the hook by the kitchen door, and walked out into the bright Manhattan morning with worn-out shoes, no job, and every ounce of her dignity still intact. While Ethan Cole stood in the middle of the diner, staring at the place where she had been, understanding with sudden, painful clarity that kindness had just cost the best person in the room everything. Chloe Bennett spent the next 2 days doing what people do when life refuses to pause for heartbreak. She kept moving. She updated her resume at a public library on 42nd Street, called 3 diners that were not hiring, picked up cough medicine for her mother from a discount pharmacy in Queens, and told herself that losing one job did not mean losing her future, even if the math in her checking account suggested otherwise. What she did not tell anyone was that the humiliation stayed with her more than the lost paycheck. It was not the apron on the counter or the name tag clicking against cheap laminate that replayed in her mind. It was the look on that older man's face when she was fired for feeding him, as if kindness had become something shameful the second it cost money. By Friday afternoon, she was sitting at her mother's small kitchen table with a mug of reheated coffee gone cold in her hands when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She nearly ignored it. Nearly. "Hello." A polished female voice came through the speaker. "Good afternoon. May I speak with Chloe Bennett?" Chloe straightened a little. "This is Chloe. My name is Vanessa Reed. I am calling from Cole Hospitality Group. We were given your name through a staffing recommendation. We are hosting a private event this evening at the Regent Ballroom on Madison Avenue, and we would like to invite you to attend a brief interview for a guest relations position before the program begins. Transportation can be arranged if needed." Chloe stared at the peeling edge of the table, certain she had heard wrong. Cole Hospitality Group was one of the largest names in the city, the kind of company that owned hotels people like her only saw through revolving glass doors. "I think there must be some mistake," she said carefully. "I just lost my restaurant job 2 days ago." "There is no mistake, Miss Bennett," Vanessa replied. "You have been specifically requested." At 6:40 that evening, Chloe stood under chandeliers the size of small cars, wearing the one navy dress she saved for funerals, weddings, and job interviews she could not afford to waste. The Regent Ballroom glowed in gold and cream, all polished marble, mirrored columns, and waiters carrying silver trays so smoothly they looked like part of the architecture. Every instinct she had told her she did not belong there. A woman with a headset greeted her by name and led her toward the back of the ballroom, where a stage stood beneath a towering screen lit with the words Cole Hospitality Group Annual Community Initiative Gala. Chloe's heels slowed. Something in her chest tightened. People in tailored suits filled the room, laughing softly over champagne, the kind of people who had never counted bus fare before the end of the week. Then the lights dimmed. A voice from the stage welcomed guests, thanked sponsors, and introduced the company's founder and chief executive officer. Chloe turned toward the podium with polite attention, expecting a stranger in an expensive suit. Instead, the man who stepped into the light was Ethan. Not the tired man in the soaked coat from the rainy night at the diner, not the quiet customer in the brown jacket by the window booth, but Ethan transformed by a midnight blue tuxedo, calm authority, and the kind of presence that made an entire ballroom fall silent before he even spoke. Her breath caught so sharply it almost hurt. Around her, hundreds of people rose to applaud Ethan Cole, billionaire hotel magnate, philanthropist, and owner of more restaurants than Chloe could count, including the one that had fired her for being too kind. On stage, Ethan accepted the applause for exactly one beat, then lifted his gaze over the crowd until it found her. And in a room full of crystal, money, and power, he looked at Chloe Bennett with the same stunned gratitude he had worn when she first set a cup of coffee in front of a man the world had mistaken for nobody. The applause seemed to go on forever, rising beneath the chandeliers like a wave Chloe could not outrun, and all she could think was that the man who had sat in her diner booth with 73 cents and rain on his shoulders had been able, at any moment, to stop her embarrassment, save her job, or tell the truth, and he had done none of those things. Ethan began speaking from the stage in the measured, confident voice of a man long accustomed to commanding rooms, thanking partners, donors, and city leaders for supporting the company's new community initiative, but Chloe barely heard a word. Her pulse was too loud. Her thoughts were sharper still. She remembered the chipped white mug in her hand, the folded diner receipt, the worn brown jacket, the way he had looked almost humbled by simple kindness, and now every memory rearranged itself under the hard light of who he really was. He had not just been another customer. He had been the man at the top of the very machine that had chewed through people like Ray, understaffed dining rooms like hers, and workers like Martha and Chloe who were expected to smile, while their lives balanced on tips and overtime. Then Ethan said her name. Not loudly, not theatrically, but clearly enough that heads turned in every direction until they found her standing near the mirrored column at the side of the ballroom. 2 nights ago, he said, looking straight at her, when I had nothing on me that could identify who I was, one person chose to treat me with dignity anyway. In a city that measures value too quickly, she reminded me what our work is supposed to mean. A soft murmur ran through the room. Chloe felt heat climb her neck. Vanessa touched her elbow and gently guided her forward, toward the stage, toward hundreds of eyes and polished shoes, and people who now seemed to be watching her as if kindness were a performance arranged for their benefit. Ethan stepped down from the platform before she reached it, meeting her halfway across the dance floor, and for one suspended second the room around them seemed to disappear. Up close, his expression was not proud or triumphant. It was careful, almost vulnerable. Chloe, he said quietly, I owe you an apology before anything else. She looked at him, really looked, and saw that he meant it. That only made it worse. You do, she answered. The room became so still she could hear the faint clink of silverware from the far end of the ballroom. Ethan took a breath. I should have told you who I was sooner. I should have done more when you were treated unfairly. Unfairly, Chloe repeated, disbelief sharpening her voice. I lost my job for feeding someone breakfast. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Ethan did not look away. I know. Do you? She asked. Because from where I was standing, it looked like you wanted to see how far kindness would go before it broke. The words landed harder than any public insult could have. Ethan's face tightened, not with anger, but with the kind of pain that comes from recognizing truth too late. Vanessa moved as if to intervene, but Ethan gave the smallest shake of his head. He deserved this. Chloe lifted her chin and kept going, every ounce of humiliation from the diner rising now with clean, controlled force. I did not need a billionaire in disguise. I needed a fair manager, a decent workplace, and a paycheck that did not disappear because I chose to treat someone like a human being. Ethan swallowed once. You are right. She laughed softly, but there was no amusement in it. And now what? I am supposed to stand here while you turn my worst week into a nice speech. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out the diner receipt, folded smooth from being handled too many times. No, he said. You were supposed to know that what you did mattered. Chloe stared at the paper in his hand, at the message she had written on the back without ever imagining it would end up in a ballroom under crystal lights. Something in her expression flickered, but it was not surrender. What I did mattered long before you had a stage to say it, she said. Then, with the entire room watching, Chloe Bennett stepped back from Ethan Cole, shook her head once, and refused to let gratitude be mistaken for permission to be saved. Chloe left the Regent Ballroom before dessert was served, before the orchestra shifted into something softer, before the room could decide whether what they had witnessed was scandal, courage, or the simple sound of truth finally refusing to whisper. Outside, Madison Avenue glittered with black cars and polished windows, but the air had turned cold again, and she welcomed it. Cold was honest. Cold did not applaud a woman for being poor and kind at the same time. By the time Ethan made it back to his penthouse that night, still carrying the folded receipt in his pocket, the silence inside his home felt different than it had after the robbery. Then, he had felt shaken. Now he felt exposed. Chloe had not rejected his gratitude. She had rejected the comfort of being turned into a lesson while the people who made her life harder kept their jobs, their power, and their distance from consequences. So the next morning, Ethan did something his executives had not seen him do in years. He canceled every appearance, every interview, every investor lunch, and locked himself in a conference room with operations reports from every late-night property in the city. By noon, he had read enough to understand that Midtown Table Grill was not an exception. It was a symptom. Complaints about understaffing had been buried under terms like efficiency. Staff turnover had been treated as normal. Emergency hardship requests had no meaningful response system. Managers were rewarded for cost control, not decency. Ethan looked around the polished room at vice presidents earning six figures to optimize numbers that had names attached to them and said, with a calm that made everyone else sit straighter, we built profit into places where dignity should have been non-negotiable, and that ends today. Ray was terminated before 3 o'clock. Martha was offered back pay for unpaid overtime discovered in the audit. Every employee at Midtown Table Grill received a wage review, access to emergency assistance, and the right to report abusive management directly to corporate without fear of retaliation. But Ethan did not send Chloe flowers, or jewelry, or a dramatic check with too many zeros. He knew enough now to understand that money offered the wrong way could feel like another insult. Instead, he asked Daniel to find out what Chloe might have wanted if life had given her room to want anything beyond survival. The answer came from a line near the bottom of an old application form and a conversation Martha remembered from a slow Tuesday in February. Chloe had once sketched an idea for a neighborhood supper program, a place where seniors, night shift workers, single parents, and anyone stretched thin could get real food without being made to feel small. Not charity, exactly. More like a restaurant built on respect first. Ethan stared at the sketch Daniel had recreated from Martha's description, all simple booths and handwritten menu boards, and a corner shelf marked community pantry, and he felt that same quiet shift he had felt watching Chloe defend Martha in the breakfast rush. This was not just about making amends. This was about building the kind of place she had already been trying to create with nothing but a coffee pot and a brave heart. 3 days later, a cream-colored envelope arrived at Chloe's mother's apartment in Queens by courier, not with a job offer, but with a one-page note in Ethan's own handwriting. No speech, no spotlight, no request for forgiveness. It said only this: you were right. Fairness should not depend on who is watching. I have made changes, and I will keep making them. Enclosed is a proposal for a community diner initiative based on your idea. If you want no part of it, I will understand. If you do, the position is yours to shape, not mine to hand down. The final page was not a contract. It was a concept sketch, detailed, respectful, and in the corner, beside a pencil drawing of a front window with warm lights spilling onto the sidewalk, Ethan had written 4 words that made Chloe sit down before her knees could decide for her. Everybody is somebody to someone. 8 weeks later, On a bright Saturday morning in Queens, the line outside the new diner stretched halfway down the block, past the flower stand on the corner and the mailbox painted with old layers of city blue. And Chloe Bennet stood just inside the front door with a ring of keys in her hand, trying to steady the kind of happiness that feels almost too large to trust. The sign above the window read somebody's table, exactly as it had on the final sketch Ethan sent her, and everything inside felt like the answer to a prayer she had never dared say out loud for herself. There were 12 red leather stools at the counter, warm pendant lights above the booths, a community shelf near the back stocked with canned soup, diapers, and toiletries, and on the far wall, framed in simple dark wood, was the diner receipt from that rainy Manhattan night, the paper flattened smooth, the ink preserved, the words still clear enough to stop people in their tracks. Everybody is somebody to someone. Chloe had argued that it belonged in Ethan's office. Ethan had said it belonged where people needed to see it. In the weeks after his letter arrived, he had kept every promise without once asking for praise in return. Ray was gone. Martha had been rehired with a raise and now stood proudly behind the pastry case, arranging lemon bars like they were jewels. A hardship fund had been created across every late-night property in the company. Managers had been retrained, policies rewritten, and for the first time in years, workers who had always felt invisible were being asked what fairness actually looked like from their side of the counter. But the most surprising part had not been the money Ethan invested. It had been the way he stepped back whenever Chloe stepped forward. He listened when she spoke about shift meals, senior discounts, neighborhood pricing, and the quiet difference between serving people and honoring them. He asked questions instead of issuing orders. He showed up in rolled sleeves carrying boxes, stayed late to help install shelves, and somehow never made any of it feel like performance. By 10 o'clock the diner was full. Nurses from the overnight shift sat beside church families and cab drivers. A retired school custodian cried after recognizing Martha and being told coffee was free until noon for opening day. Chloe moved through the room in a crisp cream blouse and dark jeans, not as a waitress trying to survive a shift, but as the woman who had built the place she once could only imagine between late-night orders and overdue bills. When she turned from the register, Ethan was standing near the framed receipt, his jacket off, his tie loosened, looking less like a billionaire than the tired stranger who had first walked into her life with rain on his shoulders and no proof that he mattered. "You were right," he said softly when she reached him. "This place was never about being rescued." Chloe smiled, because now she knew he understood. "No," she said. "It was about being seen." For a moment the noise of the diner softened around them, plates clinking, coffee pouring, people laughing in the kind of warm, ordinary way that makes a room feel blessed. Ethan took a slow breath, then reached into his pocket and drew out a small velvet box that made Chloe's heart stumble before he even opened it. Inside was not some oversized display meant for headlines, but a simple diamond set in gold, elegant and steady, like something chosen to last. "I fell in love with you before I knew what to call it," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Not because you helped me when I had nothing, but because you reminded me who I wanted to be when I had everything. I cannot promise life will never get hard again, but I can promise you this. I will never stop earning the right to stand beside you. Chloe Bennet, will you marry me?" Her eyes filled before she could stop them, and in the glow of the diner she had dreamed into existence, with the framed receipt watching over both of them like proof that small kindness can change the architecture of a life. Chloe laughed through her tears and whispered the easiest answer she had ever given. "Yes." And when the room realized what had happened and erupted into applause, it did not feel like a ballroom this time. It felt like home.